marching in. Oh, when the saints go marching in.
While the officers attempt to regain control of the
The Walking Dead is one of the best zombie apocalypse IPs of our lifetime. With The Walking Dead, Robert Kirkman brought to life an apocalyptic world filled with horror, treachery, and fear. It is a world where you need to scavenge to survive. It is a world where you need to run away from hordes and cross moral and ethical boundaries. Human against human. Human against walker. With The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners, you'll quickly learn that death can come from both sides. Hello everyone, and welcome to a special episode of the HackerNoon podcast, where we talk to Todd Adamson and Mark Domowicz from Skydance Interactive, the acclaimed developer behind my favorite VR game, The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners. Without further ado, let's get right into it. So first, could you both briefly start by just introducing yourselves and your roles at Skydance?
Sure, you want to start, Todd?
Yeah, so I'm currently creative director at Skydance. My name's Todd Adamson. I don't know, game industry dude. That's kind of all I have to say about that.
My name is, oh, sorry. Were you done that time?
No, yeah, I'm done. Go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Mark Domowicz. I'm the project director over at Skydance Interactive. Been making games for a long time, since around 2001. Started out in engineering, and then have since done a number of different roles from engineering to design to production. And my current role is like a little bit of combination of a lot of those things.
Cool. And I did some LinkedIn creeping of your profiles before this interview, and I noticed you are both at the Workshop Entertainment. Is that where you both met each other before Skydance?
Yeah, so the Workshop actually got bought out by Skydance Media. So we were an indie dev for several years, and we were doing a lot of different projects and some work for hire, and then Skydance came in and actually bought the company because they wanted to get into VR.
Okay, is that because the company had experience in VR previously before joining Skydance?
We actually didn't really have VR experience, but we had made some prototypes. Obviously, we were very interested in VR, but we were like a small indie. We were doing mostly work for hire stuff. Like we worked on Gears of War 4, doing
in that time. I was just gonna say, in that time, very few studios had VR experience. Like that was around, that must have been late 2016 or something like that. So like VR was still very, very new. So to find a studio that wholesale was ready to go with VR experience under their belt was pretty few and far between. So
I see.
I think you have to guess a little bit, but I think what they liked about our studio was that we had a focus on innovative stuff. We were doing a lot of work for hire type projects, but then sort of on the side, and I feel like that's been part of the company history, and Todd would know more because he's been at the company longer than me, but and part of the company history has always been with this sort of tinkery mindset, innovative mindset, and I think that was what attracted Skydance into picking us up for a VR focus.
Cool. What were some of the biggest projects or the ones you're most proud of that you did before you both joined Skydance?
Well, I started my career at Treyarch, and there I was able to work on like Spider-Man, So
Nice.
like I came on as like a young kid, like right when they were shipping Spider-Man 2, and I was like, it was like a dream come true for me
Yeah,
because I
yeah,
was always like a comic book nerd. Like that's like I'm an artist, so like that's how I learned how to draw. I was like Marvel comics and stuff, and I was always a huge game fan. So I got to work there, and I got to work on like Spider-Man. I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. So I started there, and then I shipped a couple games at Treyarch. I shipped Spider-Man 3 and yeah, and then a bunch of people from Treyarch split off
Mhm.
from Treyarch to start the workshop, and they poached me over there, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then we started the workshop, and that was, you know, a very interesting but very good process.
Of
And then, you
course.
know, 8 years later or something, then we got bought out by Skydance to do this. So I would say, back to the original question, like Spider-Man was definitely very cool to work
Mhm.
on. But honestly, I would say that like The Walking Dead was, I mean, it was very, very difficult, and the project, you know, had its you know, struggles, but it was definitely very rewarding
For
and
sure.
definitely like a good point, you know. So I that project is definitely one of the best.
How about you, Mark?
Yeah, actually, just before I answer, I don't know if it's well known, but to piggyback a little bit off what I was saying, that you know, the founders of the workshop, which became Skydance Interactive, were also the original founders of Treyarch. So there's like a long
Oh,
history. Yeah, there's a really long history of really powerful and strong gamecraft throughout this company. But anyways, yeah, to answer the question. My first ship game was Mercenaries for the PlayStation 2, Xbox One era. It was that open world military game set in North Korea, sort of a little bit off the back of the open world craze with GTA. And that was with a company called Pandemic Studios. And that was a really, that's the only other company I've worked for, actually. I worked for two companies in my career. And that was a really lucky first experience in the game industry. You know, that team was an amazing team. So not only was it the game itself really fun to make, but I think it was partially a really good game, but it was partially a really good game because it was really fun to make. And the team behind it was just a really amazing, cohesive team. And so to have that experience as your first shipped game and the first team to be on was just brilliant. And then of course, you know, Pandemic they don't exist anymore, but they had this really great rise. When I started there, they were a 30-man studio. And when I left, they were like a 200, 300-man studio across two continents. So I would say
that's
that was,
amazing.
yeah. So I would say, you know, other than The Walking Dead, which I agree with Todd is quite a feather in the cap, in my opinion, Mercenaries was the other game that I talk about a lot as one of my favorites.
Well, congratulations on all your success, guys. You've definitely had a really cool CV that I could look up before this interview. But
Thank you.
let's get into the nitty gritty here. So talking about The Walking Dead: Saints and Sinners, in an official statement, the Skydance CEO and the Skydance president said that their goal at Skydance was to honor the visceral world that Kirkman has created. What were some of the biggest challenges you both faced trying to transfer the complex world of The Walking Dead comics and The Walking Dead television series into VR?
I guess I'll go first unless you want to, Mark.
Go for it.
But I mean, for me, the biggest challenges were like, I mean, obviously this is a very substantial IP that a lot of people have a lot of feelings about, you know, and they have a rich history in games. So like the two things that stood out to me was that you need to have a compelling narrative, and then you also need to have that visceral element and that combat, right? And in VR, that means like we need to have melee combat, and we also need to have like a compelling narrative.
Mhm.
So like right out the gate, like, you know, typically VR games usually focus on an individual thing, but this kind of meant that we had to, you know, take on a lot more than maybe was well advised. You
Yeah.
know? But yeah, it was good though. You know,
Yeah, I
I mean,
mean,
there's. Go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say on that point, you know, taking on more than it was well advised. I mean, that was one of the challenges, right? Like if you want to sort of, you know, match all the rules of the universe, you know, that every walker and every person you see can be decapitated, and You know, to have like a subtle rule is that if walkers really only die if you brain them. And so we had to have this rule where, like, if you decapitate a walker's head, well, you didn't brain them; their head just came off, and so their heads are still alive. And just making sure that we're implementing this game that's fun and has all the rules that are also fun, but also consistent with the rule set, and then making sure that we have enough time and resources and manpower to be consistent with that rule set all the way through, and make all the rules that we need to make. That sort of implied and forced a certain amount of scope on us. That was, of course, challenging when we already have a bunch of other scope that we know that we want to implement. To have this stuff that we have to also follow provides a certain amount of challenge. So I agree with Todd there.
I got to say, those small attention to detail is really what brings the world alive. That exact case you just mentioned there, Mark, where if you decapitate the walker and you can pick up the head and still see the mouth moving, when I realized you actually went to the effort to do that, it was really amazing, because you don't really see that in really many games in VR, especially on the Oculus Quest. Like, without a doubt, this is the most complete game that's on the Oculus Quest library. So yeah, those small things are really what bring the world alive,
I think so too. Yeah, and sort of even apart from just the IP, like, there's challenges that trying to make a game with high level of VRness in it, high level of presence, that implies a lot of attention to detail as well. Or if you put in the effort to put in a lot of attention to detail, it pays off. Like one of the things, and this is a Todd gem, but like the ability to like find a cigarette and then smoke it, right? Yeah. That question, like, oh, here's a cigarette. Can I smoke it? And then the answer is yes, you can. And then the next question is, can I light it? And the next answer is yes, you can. And then the next question is, can I light it with my gun? And the answer is yes, you can. Those attention details, which are apart from the IP, but just part and parcel with VRness in general, that I think is what really helps, heighten experience for the game.
For sure. And again, that use case you talked about is something I think a lot of people try in the game.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, well, we actually got a lot of heat because you can't light a cigarette on a candle. And that, like, you don't even know how much discussion there was about this. Like, there was a lot of active debate on Slack. And it honestly came down to, like, the power of the hardware. Like, we had, like, if you want to light a cigarette, you need to have certain things on a candle, and that takes performance, and we just couldn't do it. And hit frame rate. So we had to, like, and there's like a ton of candles in the game because it's not like, and hit our ship date, because like, in a usual game, maybe you're set in the future or something, and maybe you have like electricity and fluorescent lights, but like for us, all of our light sources had to be natural. And we just couldn't, from a performance point, afford to have every candle in the game be able to light a cigarette. So I'm sorry, players. We couldn't do it.
Yeah, for sure.
We tried. There was a lot of debate about it.
So, like, decision making in VR development is a hot topic and a good topic. A lot of our readership and our viewership on HackerNoon are software developers, and some of them game developers. When it comes to sacrificing things or not getting out every gameplay mechanic that you wanted, how do you balance that? And how do you decide whether or not we're going to hit our ship date, or, let's postpone it a couple of weeks so we can make the game a bit better? How do you balance out those decisions?
I feel like as a person who is largely responsible for the production schedule, the answer was we always just said, let's do it, too much to my frustration. But no, in all seriousness, I mean, it wasn't a single method. There was a lot of things that we relied on. One of the big things was, putting ideas out there and then getting internal user feedback testing. We brought people in to look at our experience as it is and tell us, is this gameplay feature working for you? Is it confusing? Do you understand the story? So that user feedback guided us a lot. But then also we had professional user feedback. So we had hired a group whose job it is to play our game, give us a mock review, tell us the points where we're succeeding, tell us the points where we could need some work, where they don't think we're going to be competitive. So that guided us as well. And these are things where These are the external factors, where you can't, when you're living the game, you can't get the outside perspective. That's kind of how we got a lot of outside perspective. But then, of course, we also relied a lot on the traditional things, including intuition. We have a lot of experience in-house on game development, so there's a lot of good intuition on what we think is going to work. And then, of course, it's a very collaborative environment. So it's intuition from, obviously, the leadership, but then everyone involved in all these features had a tremendous amount of say. And I would venture to say that if you pinged anybody on the team about their involvement, they could wax poetic about the features that they were responsible for and the input and sort of the ownership that they had and how it's expressed in the final product. So I'd say it's a combination of all these things.
I see. And talking there about your gameplay mechanics and the decisions you made, basically, The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners, there's lots of things about it, but there's a crafting mechanic, there's a survival mechanic. It's kind of open world in a way that you can travel to anywhere you want within this map. You can follow the story. You don't really have to follow the story. You can just go and scavenge things, What was kind of your, bring us into your decision-making room board there, and how did you come to the decision to fuse all of these amazing mechanics into a game that really worked? Because you have lots of things going there, there are very few games in VR that have a crafting mechanic right now.
I mean, it was kind of like, we knew we had to have the story there, but we wanted to make a game very much based on player freedom, and we also wanted to make a survival horror game. We wanted there to be scarcity. This is very much not a power fantasy. Like, we wanted people to really feel that. So we wanted there to be like consequence for people's action. And I mean, part of it actually came out that like originally the game that we were developing was a little more of a story-based game, a little more like a Telltale type of thing. But then partway through, we kind of shifted direction because like one of our strengths as a studio is gameplay. And so we just wanted to make a game that had a little bit of a mixture, and we did want to have that gameplay element there. And just with the IP and I love horror stuff, we just wanted to make a real like horror experience and have that scarcity, but also have a strong gameplay element there. And it just kind of happened, in the chaotic mix of everything going on, getting the story element in there, but we also wanted to give the players freedom and make this more sort of free form thing where you can engage with the story, but we also have these, atrophy mechanics where, you're decreasing every day,
Yeah.
And there was like a lot of, controversy. And even after the game came out, a lot of people were like, oh, we don't like, how severe some of these mechanics are, and we just want the power fantasy, but, I think it was the decisions we made, and that's the type of game we wanted to make,
I completely agree with you. And there are enough games in the VR library that have the power fantasy, There's tons of VR arcade shooting games. You guys really made something special there. How much did you draw from past Walking Dead games that are out there, like the Telltale games and the other ones that are out there?
Well, we definitely drew from Telltale for the story element. You have the dialogue choices. We have a branching story in the game. I don't know if you've tried killing the tutorial guy 3 times, but
every time.
yeah, if you do, we pop the little notification up that says tutorial guy will remember this.
Yeah.
A little nod to the Telltale games. But we wanted to make our own thing. We didn't want to like copy the Telltale things. Like they made great games, and we want to nod to their excellent history and try to incorporate some of that. But we want to make our own unique version of The Walking Dead.
For sure. And The Walking Dead itself, it's an IP and it's a story about, the downfall of humanity and what happens to a person when there's nothing left of the world. A lot of that comes down to ethics and morals. And going off again about the gameplay mechanics you chose to input, let's talk about those ethics and morals for a second. You talked about Grand Theft Auto for a second there, Mark. That's a game that had a lot of heat when it first came out because of everything that people could do in the game. And that's just a 2D pancake game.
Right.
In VR, the first time you stab that walker, and you pull the knife out and you feel the vibration. Like I don't know what it really feels like to stab a walker, but this feels pretty damn realistic.
Yeah.
And yeah.
We thought about the moral implications a lot for a lot of different things. We made specific calls, for example, that there would be no kids in the game, because just in general we don't want users to even have that window of interactivity in that situation. We implemented personal space reactions. Those are the reactions where if you get too close to someone, they'll be like, "Hey, get away from me! Cut it out!" Even for a while we had it where only the walkers could be decapitated. We didn't quite want to pull the trigger on humans being decapitated too. And eventually we decided, okay, we can probably do that. But it was for sure a consideration. Obviously there's a lot of games out there like GTA and other things that are extremely violent. But we couldn't rely on this idea that, well, other games are violent too, so we can be violent because it's VR and because it's got this sense of self that is just beyond what you can experience in flat gaming. So because it was new and we weren't sure what the established norms were going to be, we had to be a little bit cognizant of that. We had to think about it. So it was constant in our minds. We knew we were making a violent game. We knew we were making a horror game. We knew we were making a very visceral game. How far could we push it without pushing it too far, for gamers' taste and just for making the right decisions. So yeah.
I think, I wouldn't change a thing, but this is what a lot of people do say, especially people who aren't really gamers, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I was talking actually to the developer of Arizona Sunshine, one of the developers at least, and they had similar issues. One of the things that they talked about was they were wondering whether or not they should let the player put the gun to their own head and kill themselves in the game. What would happen there? About these moral issues, you guys did have to make difficult decisions, and you did an amazing job. I wouldn't change anything about the game, but what were some specific issues where you thought, maybe this is too far, maybe we can do that? And what's kind of your own personal philosophical stance on this? Do you think since it's a video game, we should be allowed to do anything or everything? We should just stay true to the IP and do what we can to make that come to life? What's your opinion on that?
I mean, I have no moral problem with violence in video games. The dilemma for me more was that the game was too scary for some people and we had to actually tone it down. But, I don't know. I think, we're all monkeys, and I think violence is in our nature, and now we live a very kind of comfortable life. But I think in our DNA, it wasn't that long ago that, you would experience this type of violence in your day-to-day life. So I think for whatever reason, I think it's a good catharsis for people. And if you can do it in a totally safe way, and, I think people like it, and I like it. Like, I like violent video games, and I don't feel the need to justify that in any sort of way,
Yeah, I think I agree with Todd, and I also, just to be a little bit philosophical about it, I do think of games as an art form with a good canvas to express the things you want to express. It can be an evocative art form, and I don't think there necessarily should be. Obviously, there's limits for everyone's got their own personal limits on what art form is going to cross a line and become offensive or whatever. But I don't think that line should be dictated for anyone necessarily. I think that obviously what dictates it for us is we're a commercial product. So, we're dictated by what the sort of game community would be willing to accept. But as in general in video games, I don't think there necessarily has to be a line. It's sort of like any other medium where it's really up to the author to find what's meaningful and for them and the things that they want to express. And so I don't think personally there's a real line.
Cool. So this game, of course, originally didn't come out on the Quest. It was released on the Quest just this year. To to be honest, I love this game enough that I bought it first on the PSVR. I bought it then on the Quest when it came out. Then I bought it again when it was in the Humble bundle.
Thanks, man.
That it's in right now.
That's awesome. Thanks.
But one thing I did notice is that from the even from the PSVR to the Quest version, obviously there's a drop in certain things, graphics, other things. I always ask a lot of VR developers about this. What do you kind of have to sacrifice, or what changes do you have to make when porting to the lesser powered Oculus Quest, and how did you deal with those challenges?
I mean, to me, like I wasn't super involved with it's mainly like a technical job and an art job. But yeah, I mean, it gets, you have to be very precise about the things you allow on screen, like number of characters and that sort of thing. So you have to be very deliberate, but it actually surprised me, like they kept the total experience intact, like all the game mechanics and everything, things will be maybe a little lower fidelity, but the experience is totally there.
That's what I was worried about too. Like, I think everyone was worried about when we were first talking about going to Quest, which is like, well, do we have to make this a different game a little bit? Do we have to sort of like do a little bit of surgery on that and like, okay, well, maybe we can only get like one walk around screen, and we have to like cheat and like make it feel like it's the thing, or maybe split up the worlds into like sectors and make them smaller or something like that. And so, what's amazing is, like Todd said, we didn't have to do any of that. Like, sort of the fundamental experience is fully intact on a mobile VR device. And then it looks really good too. It's one of the better looking games on the device.
For sure.
So I was, it was really technical wizardry, and for like the down and dirty details, you'd have to talk to a tech director. Mm-hmm. But man, like from really early on, even super impressed by the fidelity of the graphics and the fidelity of the experience. It was really always through and through been true to even the PC game as an experience.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, and for sure the full game is there in the Oculus Quest, and to be honest, it might be best on the Quest just because there's no wires with the Quest. You can turn full 360. You can swing your arms around without worrying about breaking anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a lot of like wall hits and desk hits in the development process, for sure.
Yeah,
and a lot of damaged VR controllers.
Oh no.
a lot of people that were accidentally hit, bystanders.
Yeah. This is getting too realistic. So talking about the gameplay mechanics again there for a second, if you don't mind, I want to read you a Oculus Quest review of the game that gave you 3 stars, and I just want to give you the chance to react to one of your critics and reply to them, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yep.
So this guy said he's giving us a review. The game is great and a lot of fun. There is nice depth in the story, but there are some issues. And one that I want to focus on here, he says that perhaps the worst of all is that they have arms attached to your hands. I personally hate games that do that. The arms never look right, and they kind of flop around weird, running the VR feeling while bringing little in the way of actual value to the game. It would have been better if there were no arms. What was the decision to include arms, and how would you reply to this critic?
I mean, like, everybody's different, and everybody has their own, opinion about this. Like, there's kind of a scale, right? Mm-hmm. You have floating hands, you have arms, and then you have a whole body, right? And we made the decision, and I still agree with that decision, to just do arms, because if you have the whole body, to me, it's like actually it takes you out of the experience even more, mm-hmm. because I have no physical connection to those legs. Like games that have like a kick in them, like I press the button and it's almost like humorous to me to see like a leg stick out there and kick, because it has no relation to my physicality. So to me, it's more immersive just to do the arms, just, to a certain extent, you have to accept that you're not in reality. And yeah, that's the decision we made. I mean, I think the floating hands, I still stand by the decision to put arms in there. Actually triangulating the position of the elbow is certainly difficult. And we have ideas about how to make that better. But it's certainly at this point not going to totally align with your real world elbow. But I still prefer that over just floating hands. You know, to what I would say to that person is, you know, everybody's different. Everybody's got their own ideal. You know, maybe in the future, if we don't put any sort of mechanically sensitive things on the forearms, like wrapping a bandage, maybe we'll include that option to just have free floating hands.
Also, there was to that point, there was some gameplay elements that sort of implied that we showed your arms, like wrapping the bandage around, and then also the walkers grabbing onto your arms.
Exactly.
Like there was some aspects of it that we wanted to visually show you too, and so it sort of led itself into that direction.
For sure. And of course, you all spent a lot of time on game balancing because, you know, it's a very well balanced game. But another review here says movement is painfully slow. You can't run for long because if you do, you lose stamina and start panting and you can't see well. And and your character must be the most out of shape person in the world because even with max stamina, he can only run for 40 feet. Honestly, I think it works, but what would you reply to that?
I mean, I totally get it. You know, it gets back to kind of the power fantasy thing and to us trying to make a more severe, like survival horror type thing. You know, I don't know if we got the numbers exactly right. But I mean, certainly when you put, no player likes to have penalties, right? But if you remove all penalties, it then makes the experience trivial.
Yeah.
And then, you know, there's like hardcore people that are just like, I don't understand. Like, I'm not tired. I could keep stabbing forever. You know what I mean? But it's like, we didn't set out to make a fitness game. You know, like we're not trying to make it physically difficult. And so, like, if you were to really fight a zombie in real life, it would be far more difficult than our game. You know, so we're deliberately making a kind of authored interpretation of that experience, and we're trying not to make it physically difficult.
Yes.
I'd say too that the game does start with the player limited in that way, but I would say that that's what gives you some range, right? Like we don't want to be a power fantasy, but we do want you to experience growth with your hero and have it by the end of the game feel like, wow, my hero is much more powerful than he was when I started. It was worth all the work that I had done to do the upgrading and do the scavenging and do all these things. And so having you start in a weaker state in the beginning is what really allows for the player to experience that growth, which is an important part of the experience as well. Yeah.
And also, I think it's more realistic. Like, I think people forget that your character is usually carrying 2 shotguns, 2 pistols, a bunch of stuff in their backpack. Let's see how far you can really run with all that stuff, right?
Yeah. At one point, we were actually going to have weight. So like each object had a weight, and that would determine the amount of stamina, but we just didn't have time to do it. So we ended up cutting it. But I see. In a future project.
Yeah. And going back to a point you said there, Todd, some games in VR do actually take into account how fast you swing the controller and translate that to force in the game. What was kind of the decision-making process that you both made to not include that? Because, you know, one of the main tutorial points is you don't need to swing the controller quickly. You just need a wide range of motion. Why didn't you tie the speed of the controller to the force of the weapon in the game?
Well, the answer is kind of complicated. I mean, we do include velocity in the calculation, right? But I mean, the reality is you have no resistance, and the way we're simulating physicality in the game is based on the distance of your real hand to your in-game hand, right? So basically the theory is, and I think it works out, is that since you have no physical resistance, right? Like if you stab something, boom, your in-game hand stays here and your real world hand goes, and then your brain interprets the distance between your in-game hand and your real hand as physical resistance. So you stab something, your in-game hand goes down here, and then you see, bam, like your in-game hand goes down, right? So you can think of like that distance as the physical resistance. So, you know, with the physics and everything that we're doing in the game were using that paradigm. So that's one part of the answer. The other part of the answer is that, you know, we didn't want to make a fitness game, right? We didn't want the game to be physically difficult. And one interesting thing about VR is that you have to, you know, develop for a wide variety of people. You know, everybody's different. Everybody's got the length of their limbs are different. Their physicality is different. They have different levels of fitness. We didn't want this to be a game for like people that do CrossFit or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like we didn't want you to get actually tired. Mm-hmm. So we want you to be able to physically interact with the world in a way that's not going to like completely tire you out. So we didn't want people to be like fully doing like full strength swings like all the time, you know, like you would get tired of that like after a short period of time. And it's just not the type of game we're making. Like we're trying to make something people can play for longer, like a media experience that's more about like your decision making than your physicality.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. That idea you said about the hypothesis that your brain interprets, you know, resistance by where your hand stops. Is that something you guys came up with, or is that just a norm that's floating around in the industry right now?
I mean, well, the first time that I saw this type of thing done was in a browser game called Windowsill. I don't know if you've ever played it, but it's a brilliant game, absolutely beautiful game. I forget the developer's name, but I saw this like 10 years ago or something where like it was all physics based. It was in a browser. It was all it was 3D, but it was like a 2D side scroller, but it was all physics based. So you would click the mouse on an object and you would have to like solve these puzzles. So you'd click a mouse on an object and then you would pull that object like physically, but it would resist, right? So like its distance wouldn't increase as much as your mouse did. And it fascinated me because I come from like an art and animation background, and I was just like, holy shit. And I thought it was totally awesome. And then I saw some early games start to try to do physics in VR, like Gorn or something like that. And I always wanted to try to like use this method. And then we got the opportunity here, and you know, even while doing it, you know, there was a lot of people that were like, is this really going to work or something? You know what I mean? But I think, you know, the big question was like, are players going to kind of accept this abstraction, right? Like the abstraction of, no, it's not you one-to-one, but you're kind of controlling an avatar, and, you know, we're using that kind of cheat. But, you know, I think it worked out. So I think it's pretty cool.
I think it's really cool. Yeah.
I was gonna say that I think it worked out quite early on too. Like even in our prototype phases, we spent a lot of time prototyping. You know, back to what you were saying about how we make decisions. Like one of the big things was just a lot of prototyping. And I would venture to say that early on, what Todd was saying clearly was working. You know,
but I mean, it was one of the biggest struggles we had as well was teaching people how to do it, because it was kind of a new paradigm. So we started play testing it. And what we found is that like, you know, like we try to encourage range of motion. So we try to encourage like a full stab motion. And when we'd bring players in and we'd have them do the tutorial, everybody would grab the knife and they would just do this. Like they would just like jerk their hand in air and expect that to stab.
Yeah.
And it was so like kind of weird to me. But I understand it. Like, I think I blame the Wii maybe, because people had like these motion controls where it's like if you were actually trying to stab something, you know, you'd like do this. But like everybody, like once you put a controller in their hand, they just lift their hand up and they're like, stab. That's the stab command. You know what I mean? And it's like, it wouldn't work. And it was like, I was like clawing my eyes out, like trying to figure out like, okay, how do I get people to actually do this motion? And it took a long time too. And eventually what we had to do is we had to like, when people would do this, then we would make like a bright pink ghost hand come out and be like, continue, continue, continue. And then people would like continue the stab. And the first time they did it, I was like, glory, hallelujah. I was like, yes.
For sure. And I think the way you just set up the game kind of teaches you that, because if you don't stab with the full motion, the walker will just kind of like back off a bit, but you won't actually make contact. And I think, people just learn by playing it. I think you really made a well-balanced game that you kind of learn what works and doesn't work throughout your playthrough.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I agree with Todd though, man. I feel like the Wii experience, like the Wii Controls, like I don't know, that taught a lot of people that you could just sort of like flick your wrist and then see like an in-game experience that was like disproportionate from that. And we had the same problem early on. We had there's a little bit of punching in Archangel, which was a game we had done previous, and the exact same thing happened. You have this giant mech, and you'd be like, "Hey, in the mech, we need to punch this bridge," and players would just kind of like shake the controller and expect it to like break a bridge. And we're like, "No, what would you do if you were actually trying to punch a bridge? Imagine that." And we didn't crack that egg. So I think this time around we finally did.
Nice, good for you. And one of the biggest complaints you see from a lot of people maybe entering VR for the first time is that a lot of the games on the Oculus Quest especially just feel like tech demos. You don't have a full game, you don't have a full narrative especially. And The Walking Dead, Saints and Sinners, by far one of the best narratives on the Oculus Quest library. How much iteration did you guys do on that story and that narrative line? Did you go through different writers? Did you get different pitches? How many times did the story change throughout development?
So that was a very long. The story of the story is itself a thing. It was a very long process, like Todd was saying early on, and like I'll just say, like this project has its roots all the way in 2016.
Wow.
And early on in that initial development was very, very story focused. And it was, in fact, the game had sort of taken different forms through its development. And an early form of it was a very story-based game. And so we had a whole thing with we had a writer room process that was, months of our writers and writers from Skybound collaborating on the story. Sorry, I forgot, what was the question again?
How much iteration did the narrative go through? How many times did you have to rewrite,
right.
Things like that?
Yeah, it was a lot actually, because it had taken so many forms, right? And so there was that initial form for what it is, and then it ended up not working out and we had to re-examine it. There were different changes for taste, but then there were also changes for, production reasons. Like, okay, well, it turns out that this is not, we can't have as many levels as we wanted to, or we can't have as many quests as we want to. So what are we going to do about, adjusting the story for that sort of thing? So it was a continuous process. I mean, I guess it depends a little bit on what you mean by like a change in the story.
Yeah.
But the story was continuously being tweaked, almost to the end in some ways. If you want to comment specific details, missions themselves being tweaked. If you want to talk about like structure, even story structure was something that was being tweaked, maybe 6 months out to the end. We were still thinking about changes to story structure. So
cool.
It was a constant thing.
I have one specific question about the story that I do see a lot on the forums. This is a spoiler, so if anybody watching this hasn't played the game, turn this off. But at the very end, what was kind of the thoughts around deciding to force the character to save Casey or kill wow, her name's blanking on me.
I think so. Who's not with us, and I wish was the creative director and narrative director of the project, and there's kind of an internal team inside joke that he's kind of he likes violence, and he likes forcing like twisted decisions on the player, and he really wanted to make sure that the player came up against a decision like that, and make the player make really tough moral decisions for themselves, which have no true right answer. That there's going to be an answer with some upside, but guaranteed to have some downside no matter what choice you made. And so that I would say that was kind of his baby. He wanted to make sure. And then I would say too, though, I mean, even though that was his baby, I think that was a really good fit with the IP anyway.
For sure.
Back to what you were saying about like what is our challenges of using the IP. Well, one of the challenges was making sure that we were true to some of these hallmarks of the IP, which is, one of the big ones is telling human stories of struggle and tough decisions and who you become in the apocalypse. And so that was really, that was an opportunity for our narrative director to really dig in and, and explore that with these sorts of like moral questions.
Hey, big brother. There's not much to say beyond I'm sorry, but I have to do this. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I'm a wreck, Jeff. I keep seeing that little girl's face. These visions of her turning. This whole mess is fucking with my head. What did the Martins do to deserve being exiled? It makes no sense. They are good people.
I think it was a great choice, and you kind of really pushed the boundary in VR. I see you have an amazing video game collection behind you there, Mark, so you might know what I'm talking about. I'm not sure if you're that era, but when the first Ultima games came out, it kind of broke a boundary where people realized there's morality to decisions in video games. And in VR, we don't have that. The other zombie games, you're just really shooting zombies. There's no decisions. But with The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners, somebody will walk up to you and say, hey, give me some medicine. My boyfriend's dying. Right. You could just shoot them in the face. And it's like, that's never happened before in a VR game. And I really commend you for that because, honestly, it blew me away.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
So, lastly here, I'm talking to a lot of developers and publishers about the issues they've had to adapt to COVID. In your experience, how has COVID changed the game development industry from your point of view, and how has your team adapted to those changes?
I would say that it's really, the changes are kind of the changes that every company's facing. I can't think of anything that is unique to the game industry, but it's all the same things that I think every company is facing, and there's definitely challenges. I think there's a certain amount of friction that gets added on all of our processes. Like, for example, we wanted to do some motion capture, and so you can't just get people in a room again and do motion capture. Everyone's got to go and get tested first, and it can't be all the people that you would typically have in a motion capture set. It can't be that free form. It's got to be specific people who have gotten tested, or like coordinating meetings, for example. It's a lot easier to coordinate meetings and get everyone coordinated in general in person, but now having to do it through Zoom and that sort of stuff just adds an extra layer of friction. But I don't know if Todd, you had anything in mind, but I can't think of anything specific to games that is has affected us.
I mean, I think we were actually better positioned for it. Like the whole lockdown literally happened when we were like 4 weeks from shipping PSVR.
Wow.
Right. Or at least locking down our ship for PSVR. And I think companies that are a little more tech oriented, like we all obviously work on computers, like, and video games is a very tech oriented thing. So we're a little bit better positioned than probably other industries. So it was a pretty quick adaptation for us. Like, we didn't even slip our ship date.
Nice.
We're just like, one day everybody's like, all right, everybody's going home. It's gonna take a couple days. IT's gonna bring all your computers and everybody get set up, and now this is what we're doing.
We did have a certain amount of experience in that anyway, because a certain amount of our developers were already working from home. We have external contractors that work closely with us. Not even just contractors, some full-time employees who have been working remotely the whole time, and so there's a certain amount of experience. And then I would say too that I personally was a little bit nervous about the transition, but it wasn't as bad as I was feeling. And I think part of that was because where the challenge is when it's mixed. I think when part of the studio is working from home and part of the studio is working in-house, you sort of design your processes and tool set with whatever the in our case, working in an office, we design our processes and tool sets for that. And then people working from home are the outlier, and it feels like a pain to sort of accommodate that case. But then the opposite is true when everyone's working from home. Once everybody's working from home and you can tailor everything to that process and tools, your tool set to that, that becomes sort of the easier thing almost. And in fact, if there were people working in the office, that might be a little bit weird. So, I still think overall it's a little bit tougher, but it's not as bad as I had thought it was initially.
For sure.
I mean,
sure.
I think the big loss is ad hoc communication, right? Because like now basically every communication you have with somebody has to be deliberate. It has to be like, oh, I'm going to contact this person, right? Where when you're all working together, there can just be ad hoc conversations that sometimes lead to features,
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And those are kind of gone now. So it's almost like a little more regimented, like everything has to be kind of deliberate and part of a process rather than a little more free form where things can happen kind of loosely. And I do think that is a detriment, definitely.
Yeah, along those lines too, I feel like you miss just general buzz, like a thing that I like to measure informally to get a sense of like, how, is the project that we're working on, is the effort that we're working on healthy? And one of those things is this like soft concept of buzz. Are people talking? Are the conversations going on? What's the energy in the room? You can't really, you can't measure the temperature of the room in here. So you have to use other metrics to figure that out.
I see. Cool, guys. And as I said before, lots of the HackerNoon readership are devs, software devs, indie game devs. Since both of you are in the industry, lots of our readers, they're trying to get into the gaming industry. Some are trying to get into the VR gaming industry. Do you have any specific words of advice for people who, want to get a job in VR gaming? Is there anything that would specifically stand out on an application to you?
I mean, I would tell them to do research. Like look on LinkedIn, look at people's resumes and pick a specific thing that you want to start as, right? Like whether it be 3D art, whether it be game design, it's like, it depends on the person, right? Whether it be audio. So I would advise like, being very specific and curtailing your resume and your skill set and developing that skill set to a specific thing. And then hit people up. On LinkedIn, like people hit me up on LinkedIn, I'll talk to them on the phone,
Nice.
Just reach out to people. But definitely have a specific skill set. And, in order to get a job, it is competitive. So you need to have a demonstrable skill set in a specific area. Even if you want to branch out later, that's fine. But in order to get in, you need to have that specific skill set. And just keep at it. Like motivation is such a big part of the game. Don't relent.
Yeah, and I would say, make games. Just do it. Like nowadays, the idea of making games is so much more accessible than it was back when Todd and I were getting in the industry. It was a very technical, nerdy thing. But nowadays, the tool sets that they have available, the ability, like things like Unity and Unreal being free and available. The barrier to entry is so much lower. There's really no excuse. So if you want to make games professionally, make games as a hobby first. That's going to teach you so much of the ropes. And on a resume, 10 times more powerful to see someone with a demo than it is to see somebody just with words, and an academic background. Let's see what you can do. Let's see some of your handiwork. Let's see some of your craft in actual concrete, concrete executable. That there's so many benefits to actually just doing, and that's what I would recommend.
For sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
I agree with that. Like if we're gonna hire a designer, like we want to see things they've actually developed. For sure.
Of course. And to end things off there, guys, talking to that same audience, can you think of a specific headache you had, not even just with Saints and Sinners, just in VR game development in general, that, if you had known beforehand that this would turn out this way, you would have changed one thing? Could you try to maybe save our readers from having the same headache you had during a specific part of the process?
I guess this is a little bit maybe technical. I don't know if this gets to the point that you're asking.
That's good.
But this is a mistake that we made, and I don't know that we know the solution either, but we took a lot of prototypes to shipping. So a lot of the things that actually shipped started as prototypes. Mm-hmm. That's really good for fast movement and fast development, but it's not great for sort of the long-term lifetime of the system itself. And it leads to a certain bugginess and a certain lack of robustness. And so to the degree, and I guess a lot of that stems from like visual scripting. So for like users out there, visual scripting is great. It's an amazing thing. It's an amazing tool. But one of the downsides is it can be a little bit hard to maintain. It can be a little bit hard to collaborate with. So some background in, maybe this is just my technical background shining through, but some background in sort of actual text scripting or programming, I think would do wonders in teaching you how to do better visual scripting. Even if you're going to do visual scripting as sort of your main way of doing it, some understanding of how it works at a more programmery level is going to allow you to make more robust systems, which could end up being, which if it gets converted by a programmer, it's going to help them out. If it ends up shipping, like sometimes it did for us, it's going to make for a more robust feature that ships.
Yeah, I agree with Mark, and I'll expand upon what he said a little bit, which is, VR, it is like the constraints are incredible, right? Like you have to render many more pixels typically, and you have to do it at 70, 90 FPS. So you have to make very deliberate decisions about what you're doing. So if anybody's starting out, I would just say, have a sense of humility about the process, and don't just barrel in, thinking that you can do everything with visual scripting. I mean, if you're working solo, like go ahead and do visual scripting, but just have a healthy respect for what you don't know. Mm-hmm. And then I would say, focus yourself. Like don't try to do too many things. Especially if you're an indie, if you're solo, or if you have like 3 people, like focus yourself and do a very specific thing very well. Don't try to spread yourself out. Like don't try to make, a competitor to the big AAA game. Like it's never going to happen. You're going to drown and you're going to give up. Mm-hmm. Like just focus on being the best at a very specific thing.
Yeah, that's great advice. Great advice. Thanks very much to both of you. Let's end on what I assume will be a cliffhanger. Everybody's wondering, will there be a Walking Dead Saints and Sinners 2 in the works at any time in the future?
No comment.
You as well, Todd, no comment?
Yeah, I mean, I can't, every marketing and everybody would kill me if I commented on what we're working on right now. I'll just say that, we're hard at work on stuff right now, and we're working on some cool stuff, and, we'll let more information out about it in the future.
Well, thanks very much, and I'm excited for all of your future works, guys. Thanks very much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you.
Limarc.
Interesting.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for watching another HackerNoon podcast. If you liked what you saw, please give us a like and subscribe for more future podcasts on virtual reality with some of the biggest VR game devs in the industry. Also, be sure to follow Skydance Interactive on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Thanks, and see you next time.